Hello, 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 coaches and leaders. I am so excited to have two very smart human beings on with me. They are academics. They've written multiple books. We have Jacy and Rita on with me. Um, we are going to talk about coaching mindsets and a bunch of other stuff too, because they just or are releasing, right? It hasn't been quite released, the second edition with post-pandemic highlights of their book on not post sorry post-pandemic research findings. Is that correct? Of their book around coaching mindset. So we're going to talk all about what they have found around what supports coaches in impacting educators. So before we jump into all of it, first I want to welcome you both to the show.
Thank you.
Good
Yeah.
morning.
Yeah, good morning. So, Jacy, this is your second time on the show. You are a repeat offender, and this is amazing. I love when folks come back on. So, before we jump in, I would love you both to just share briefly what has been your journey in education. Where did you start, and what led you to what you do now?
Sure. Rita, take it away.
Okay, all right. So it's hard to condense many years of being in education, but I'll try to do so. I started as a teacher,
Hmm.
elementary, then became a reading supervisor in my school district, where I became really interested in how teachers learn and the
Hmm.
fact that I had to spend a lot of time with teachers. Went off to the university, taught there for many years, and again, just followed my passion, working with people about how to improve instruction overall in a school rather than just focusing one teacher at a time. So you get involved in research, you get involved in writing, you find great colleagues like Jacy at Polito, and it moves on from there. That's the shorthand version.
I love it. I love and I'm very similar in terms of having my eye on impact. So instead of one at a time, how can I have a whole school impact, and then how can I have a whole district impact? So I love that. I too share that. All right, JC.
Yeah, absolutely. Good morning again. Great to be here. Much like Rita, started off as a middle school teacher, reading specialist, literacy coach, ended up going back for a doctorate really to kind of study this idea of larger scale impact, right? How do we improve teaching and learning at scale, particularly around literacy, particularly around adolescent literacy, which is a big interest of mine. And was very fortunate to find great research and writing colleagues such as Rita Bean, and have been really focused at this point in my career on trying to support coaches and specialized literacy professionals and all of those teacher leaders who are really the engines of kind of school improvement. So that's our big focus now.
I love this. This is amazing. Okay. So you all, I mean, I want to like dive into your brains. I just need you to know, as you talk, I'm like, I have so many questions. All right. So I want to jump in here. I love how you think about coaching, right? And you think about coaching not as a formal role, which when you share this with me, I was like, oh my gosh, I think about coaching like this. And it's evident in our language that we think about it as a formal role, and you believe that it's not or you don't think of it as a formal role, but much more as a set of activities, right? And I would love you to share what your thoughts are on that. And in my mind, it connects right with those coaching mindsets. Yeah. Okay, cool. So feel free to share about that, what your thoughts are, why you think that way, and share with us all the things you know.
Because I think, oh, I know many years ago, someone said Rita Bean was uh, looking at the future, because I always work with reading specialists.
Hmm.
And yet I kept saying, you have to have a leadership role. You can't just go into your pull out classroom and work with one student at a time, five students at a time, and make a difference in the school as a whole. So, one of the first books I wrote was about 86 pages, and it was on leadership. Can you believe it? It was the first book on how you serve as a leader in the school, doing things that make teachers trust you, establishing relationships, and helping them see that part of your job was not just working with students, but having that dual role of working with students and working with teachers. And if you think about Catherine Snow's book, I think 1998, she talks about that. And now we're coming back to it again, even in chapter 49 in Pennsylvania, saying you have to have a dual role. You can't just do one and not the other. And I think Jacy and I have taken that now and even broadened it to the sense that we're saying, hey, you have to know the system. And I have to admit that, there was a narrow lens. Well, how do
Mhm.
you improve coaching? How do you improve coaches? And not really looking at the fact that there are a lot of other things. That's my version on it.
Mhm. I love it. JC, what are your thoughts?
Unsurprisingly, I totally agree. I remember reading for the very first time in Rita's first edition of her reading specialist book, now literacy specialist book, a single line I think that said something to the effect of coaching is a set of activities, not just a role. And that I was a coach at the time. That really informed my work, and I think there was a big frame shift for me that okay, yes, I was a formal coach. I had the title of coach, but really my role was to encourage teacher leadership broadly, right? So that teachers are working with each other, they're coming together in teams, in professional learning communities, in instructional leadership teams. I was one engine of, leadership and improvement in a school, but unless I was able to build the capacity of all those around me as well, in partnership with the principal, in partnership with team leaders, then just as Rita said, my one-on-one coaching or working with one student at a time wasn't probably going to make as big of an impact as I wanted. And so, Rita really did inspire me. And I think that all of our work together since then has been in this direction of, how do we talk about coaching in a way that invites in teachers, to coach one another as principals, assistant
Mm,
coordinators, specialists, all of whom can play coaching roles. They can all engage in coaching activities. And it was really that conversation. I remember years ago, Rita and I were at a conference. We started talking about this, and it was really the genesis of the first edition of Cultivating Coaching Mindsets. This idea that, well, what are the ways of thinking and working that
mhm.
really lead to a culture of coaching in schools, not just for the coach, but really for all adults.
I love it. And so you have the 4 coaching mindsets. I'd love you to share about them and it's what I when I was reading about them, it occurred to me I started thinking of them as hats, like different hats a coach might wear. And I think in the conversation about being a coach currently, I do think coaches kind of talk about different roles they play or hats they wear, but not in this way at all. It's more like bus duty, hallway monitor, right? And it's like the other duties as assigned. And it just kind of occurred to me. I do think coaches think about the different hats they wear, but this is very distinct and different. And I love the way you talk about these mindsets because I found it very empowering and just a way of focusing our attention in a way that really makes an impact. So if one of you would share what those 4 mindsets are and just a little bit about each mindset.
Jacy?
Sure, I can start with that. So in the upcoming second edition, we really zoomed in on 4 big mindsets, and we are clear that these are not the only mindsets out there, but they are really the 4 that we have seen empower coaches and teacher
Mhm.
leaders over a number of years. So those 4 mindsets are acting and thinking like a change agent, a facilitator, a designer, and an advocate. And I think what you hear in those 4 mindsets is not, exactly, Becca, the idea of different roles that coaches play has been out there, I think, for a long time. I think of the work of
Mhm.
like Killian and, acting like a data coach or so on. But we really tried to dig down into what are the foundational ways of thinking and acting beneath all of those maybe individual roles you might play day to day. And in the second edition, we really talk about, I think, particularly post-pandemic, particularly as AI and the diversification of students in every school and every district is increasing. what are the ways of thinking and acting that really make a difference in schools? And so, when you're thinking like a change agent, you're thinking at the systems level, you're thinking about kind of larger scale shifts in teaching and learning. You're not just working one teacher at a time, but you're really thinking about groups. You're thinking about one-on-one, small group, whole group. You're thinking about all those systems, how they interplay, how you're partnering with principals as a facilitator. And we've talked about this before, Becca, you're really shedding that kind of expert kind of mantle. And instead, you're thinking about, how do I bring adults together in a school to learn with and from one another in this kind of collaborative venture? You're really facilitating adult learning and development. You're not the sage on the stage. You're not kind of the expert, although you do have content knowledge. We don't want to discount that, right? But that's not what you're leading with. You're leading with facilitative skills. The idea of being a designer, where you're thinking about teaching and learning as design challenges. It's not that students are broken somehow, or that the curriculum is, you're thinking about, okay, what's the match between my purposes and my instruction and student outcomes? How am I shifting the instructional core slowly over time? How am I talking with teachers, not about them being struggling or resistant, but as saying, how can we help you achieve your goals most efficiently? Those are design challenges, right? And then lastly, acting as an advocate for students, for teachers, for communities, sometimes for curriculum. We've seen big shifts in curriculum post-pandemic, nationwide in the US, and coaches and all those who take on coaching roles, specialists, interventionists, leaders, are playing that advocacy role on behalf of equitable outcomes for all children in all schools.
Yeah, I love it. Yes. I love these four mindsets. I just think they hit the nail on the head in terms of how we think about things, because what we know is when we think about things differently, we see different solutions, and it literally informs our behavior differently, right? If I'm acting as an advocate,
Absolutely.
that informs the way I think about something differently than even if I'm thinking about something as a facilitator, right? Even coming from those different lenses. Rita, did you want to add anything about these
Actually,
mindsets?
I do, because you were talking about changes. And one of the
Mhm,
changes from edition one to edition two is we actually had leadership as a mindset before the second edition. And we changed it because we now put leadership as one of the broad umbrellas that actually kind of undergirds or is a foundation for all of those four mindsets that we're describing. And I think that's really important, because all of that is leadership.
yeah.
And we're often arguing as we meet and talk about studies about, well, how do you define leadership? What is it? Is it a role? Is it a set of characteristics? Uh,
Mhm.
is it
It's
the
a
way you
huge debate.
behave?
Yeah.
Yes. And
Yeah.
so I think that that was an important change for us. And we
Mhm,
added to that the importance of relationships.
mhm.
So
I
these
love
are
it.
all the foundational things. The importance of understanding the system before you can change the system, right? You
Mhm,
need to
mhm,
understand it. And often, we've learned a lot. When I began, it was like a focus, a narrow focus. What do I do as a coach? Instead of thinking, what are all these factors, the
mhm,
principle and so on, that are affecting me? And then
mhm,
also, what's the vision for the school? So this is
mhm,
a totally different way. And I guess what startles me at times, wow, what a tough role.
mhm,
What a tough and difficult job, and how
mhm,
important it is to have well prepared individuals, right?
mhm. Yeah.
In that
Yep.
role. And how
Mhm,
can we prepare them, and how can we help them to be effective? And that hits on that impact, Becca, because
mhm,
I don't think we've done the job
mhm,
in establishing the value of
mhm,
coaching. I think there's still a disagreement
mhm.
and an
Yeah.
argument about whether we should be spending all those funds on those
Mhm.
folks. So,
Yep. And I think a big part of creating valuable humans that make a huge impact is training. Is really intentionally training, right? Just because you got hired for a job, right? The Peter principle, right? Someone's an excellent classroom teacher, they become an instructional coach, and just because they're a great, teacher of children does not necessarily mean they're a great facilitator of adult learning, right? So, what you were saying really made me think of something that I find really important in my own coaching when I'm working with systems. I ask them, what are your goals, right? What are your school improvement goals? What are your district improvement goals? And then I one of the parts of my training is coaches, you want to be coaching in line with and supporting the school goals. We are all, I do this, we're all going in the same direction. And I say that all, I'm like, we are going at the same stream, same direction, right? So, and often, very often in schools, and I'm sure you found this too, that we have coaches over here coaching something. And my beautiful coaches, they walk into classrooms and they see often all the things going wrong, right? So it's sometimes hard for them to be like, what do I choose? And then there's the school goals over here that may or may not, people may or may not know. Sometimes it lives in a filing cabinet. Sometimes, sometimes or sometimes the staff knows and it's almost separate, right? There's the teacher goals that somehow are separate than the school goals. And it's when we have that systems view, and I love that you name that in the book, we are working to we are one system, one direction, moving together.
Difficult to do, but important.
Important to be intentional about it.
Right. And what you're talking about actually actually is one of the challenges that we addressed in a study that we did during the pandemic when we talked with coaches, and also in a national survey that we're just analyzing right now, and that is common expectations. The need for everybody, as you're saying it, to be on the same page. When you have teachers who have a different view of what coaches should do or who they should work with,
Yeah.
and the principal, and then the coach herself, and what for himself, what the expectations are for them. So that business of expectations is really, I think, one of the most difficult challenges that people face, because they come into it with different perspectives.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
then
for
they're
sure.
disappointed.
I know. And I think there's role clarity. And then I think another perspective that I work really hard to intentionally clarify is what we call good teaching in schools. I think it's an assumed thing that you, the teacher, thinks good teaching is the same as me, the coach, which is the same as the principal, and it's often not.
It's interesting, Becca. I'll just lift up one finding from that pandemic study that Rita and I worked on, with interviewing and surveying coaches across 4 states. They really reported that in some ways their coaching work became a lot clearer and a lot more focused, because everyone, whether it's teachers or leaders, the coaches specifically, were having to zoom in and focus on kind of, just a few kind of core power standards. And to your point, a few core effective teaching practices, as everyone was tilting kind of to teaching online for the first time, wide scale. It allowed a coaching conversation that I think for many that we interviewed felt kind of new, because everyone was learning. Everyone was kind of a beginner. I know you've talked a lot about growth mindset in the past, and that kind of beginner's mind. And coaches, principals, teachers were all kind of in that same boat, and were able to have that conversation and align their goals and purposes, in some cases kind of more than they ever had before. And so that's one thing I think Rita and I are curious to kind of follow up on, particularly, now we're a few years out of the pandemic. To what extent has that stuck around, that alignment, that real focus on kind of core standards and core effective teaching practices? Or have we gone back to the kitchen sink approach? And
Yeah.
if we have, then, how can we even look back at some of those moments during the pandemic when we had to all kind of pick and choose a little bit more and zoom in and carefully align our work? How can we, bring that kind of way of thinking back around a little bit, now that we're kind of a few years beyond?
Beyond. Yeah, exactly. I think that's really great. There's a piece of your book I want to highlight here because I was like, this is great language, and it gave me really great distinctive language. You have a matrix too. So I want to talk about school culture now. How can coaches understand school culture, right? Which is hard for to put our hands around. And I believe are there 3 levels? 3
We
levels? Did I say
we
it
definitely
correctly?
we definitely borrow heavily from Edgar Schein and his 3 levels of culture, for
3
sure.
levels of culture. And the thing I want to talk about right now, because we'll talk about 3 levels. I bet this isn't one of the levels too. I don't know. I want to talk about human capital and social capital, because I was like, there's a matrix in the book. I love me a good matrix. And so I would love you to share what is human capital, what is social capital, and how does understanding this impact school culture?
Becca, that matrix was developed after I worked with Reading First, and we
Okay.
got to starting to think more about culture. And actually, the faculty members who developed it were from the University of Pittsburgh, and they did studies in schools. And what they were finding was that well, first of all, let me go back to human capital deals, of course, with all of the human resources, the people, their experience, their education, and so on. So, do you have a strong faculty who've been there a long time, or like in some schools, in urban schools, where you get novices and so on? There's not as much in the way of human capital, but social capital deals with, of course, the ability of individuals to work together, to have a common goal, to be concerned about kids, to care about kids, to believe in kids, to believe in their family and their community. And what these researchers found was that social capital was as important as, if not more important than, human capital. That ability to work together, to care, and to work as a team. And they're finding that in businesses. I mean, there's no different from what you see if you think about our society as a whole. Businesses are learning that too. So that's when I started to think about this matrix and to develop it as a tool that coaches could use to think about what kind of school do they work in, and then given the school in which they work, what does it mean for how they're going to work with teachers. So if you
Yes.
have low human capital and high social, hey, you know what you need to do. You need to develop content, right? You need
Mm-hmm.
help to develop. And that's probably something a little easier to develop than perhaps the ability to work as a team. So I don't want to go into any more depth unless you have questions or Jacy wants to expand. But that whole matrix has been really exciting when we do professional learning activities for coaches to look at, and we want them to take it back and to use it with their teachers to help teachers think about the culture in which they're working.
Yeah.
Jacy?
Yeah, I'll just add that it is an interesting tool to have coaches use to analyze, a school as a whole, but also particular teams within a school. And as they're thinking like a facilitator, thinking like a designer of professional learning, I think it can be really helpful in guiding, am I going to be doing some, team building? Am I going to be kind of using some protocols to help build the trust within the group, to build those kind of reflective, muscles? Or am I going to lean into, hey, we need some content delivery. We're going to jump into a book study, or we're going to do, a deep dive into one particular practice that we're all going to try in kind of a lesson study way. And so I think that tool of really analyzing social and human capital starts to surface what we in the book call kind of seeing the system, right? It helps coaches to see the system and then think like an advocate, a designer, a facilitator, to help teachers get what they need to take those next steps.
And the
I
thing I
think,
would add,
oh,
is that I think it's led Jacy and me to think more about the importance of group coaching.
Right.
Now, we value individual coaching. There is no doubt you can make a difference with an individual teacher and absolutely create positive change in so many ways. But that notion of group coaching, I don't think we've given enough credit to. And so we've really started to pursue, how do you help groups change? So I just wanted to
oh,
add that.
that is really interesting. I have not thought about that as when we do group coaching. Well, first, we would need to have some kind of foundational psychological safety, right? If we have a
Exactly.
culture, if we have perfectionism rampant in our culture, group coaching could be actually more detrimental, right? Okay, I love this. So, and something I just want to kind of really simply name is, as I was reading this, it seems like generally schools are seem to be more aware of human capital, right? Who in our school has a large amount of expertise or a higher level of skill. Sometimes skill is not related to expertise. um and right, so a little more aware of that versus that social capital, which is, we we need to be putting our attention on making sure our teams work together well, right? Team cohesion. I like to call them team cohesion builders instead of team builders because I'm like, this is what we're doing. We're not so this is Becca making that up. Um, I for culture, you gave an analogy that actually you quote another researcher. So this other researcher gave an analogy of tinker toys, describing how when we think about school culture, describing how the circles and the nodes, right? Those little like little individual pieces might I don't know. I want you to explain it. I'm not going to do a great job. But I liked that analogy of having us operate as tinker toys in terms of culture. I'd love you to share that. And then I'd love you to share about those 3 levels of culture as well.
Let me start with Tinker Toys and turn the levels of culture over to Jacy's because I want to tell you a secret. When we brought up the Tinker Toy thing, JC said to me, "Do you think our readers will know what Tinker Toys are?" So I assume you do, right?
I do. I remember tinker toys.
Okay, all right. So it was something we said, do we really want to put this in? And I said, oh, yeah, I really like this. So anyway, we're really saying, yes, you've got the human capital, the little round, I don't know what to call them either now, but then you've got the connectors.
Mhm,
And that's the notion that, and it's Pill and Leanna and Carrie, Leanna and Pills, and they're the ones who use that, and they're saying that's how do you make the connections between the individuals and really look at the strengths that each of the individuals bring to the team, and
mm,
try as coaches to make sure that you're encouraging the development of the strengths and helping people acknowledge where they have a need for growth too.
mhm, mhm,
And we know that's, as someone said to me, if you didn't have people, well, we wouldn't have any problems. It's the same as
mhm.
students.
Right. We also wouldn't have education.
That's right. So anyway, that's the notion of getting those connections together.
Mhm,
And uh, I I I think we have a lot more to learn about that because
mm,
that's where all the difficulties lie. I watch my son come home. He's a CEO in a business, and his whole thing is leadership. And he'll come home very tired, and he'll say, the struggle is with getting us all to work cohesive, as you're
mm,
saying, getting us to
mhm.
work together. But let me turn the culture levels over to JC.
Yeah, sure. So, we borrow heavily from the researcher and theorist Edgar Schein, who for a long time has talked about 3 levels of culture. Think about it almost like an iceberg, where the tip is kind of above the water. And he talks about it as the visible artifacts, right? These are things when you walk into a classroom or walk into a school, you can actually see, right? It's the posters on the wall, it's the mission statement on the wall, it's how desks are arranged, it's all the visible tangible parts of the school. But underwater is this next level as we're kind of diving down of espoused values. These are the things that we say about ourselves in schools, right? This is what we say our mission is. This is what we say we want for students. In many ways, this is kind of some of the hidden parts of the curriculum, right? It's starting to get to what our beliefs are. But then at the very bottom is, and most hidden, right, are our underlying assumptions. And this is our kind of collective, systems of belief and, around, can children succeed? Who are the kids in our schools? Which teachers are able to have agency and speak up in meetings, and which teachers can't? And as I've written about in a different book with Kevin Fahey and Angela Bridenstine, Francis Hensley, called The Uncommon Theory of School Change, we talk about this as the deep dive, that if you're going to really see the system and understand culture in schools, you need to kind of dive down through those layers, right? Don't just stay at that level of visible artifacts or even just the layer of, who we say we are. You actually have to get down into what are some of our fundamental beliefs about teaching and learning. And I think that as coaches are working with teachers, having those layers of culture in mind and using reflective dialogue, right, as an engine for teacher and coach growth, right? That dialogue back and forth between teachers and coaches surfaces the underlying assumptions and allows us to slowly shift those, right? So that's where I think certainly one-on-one, but also we talk a lot, I think about small group coaching. Rita, you're absolutely right. I think we've really reinvested in that and looked to the work of Lindsay Gibbons and others who are understanding the ways that group coaching can be so powerful. Um, to really kind of surface those questions. Well, what do we believe here, and how can we, um, you know, spur small changes by saying, let's just try something. Let's take a chance. Let's pilot something in our classrooms, and then let's reflect on what difference did it make, and did that difference now shift the way we think about it, right? So we've talked about this before. I'm always a fan of Tom Guskey's work and that kind of relationship of, do we have to change beliefs first, or sometimes can we shift practice, and by shifting practice, change beliefs? I think that starts to get at that kind of deep dive and surfacing culture and then shifting culture.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
it's not easy. I
No.
mean, that's the key. I mean, it's you have a receptive teacher and you walk in and you work with that teacher and everything's wonderful and you're seeing change and so on. But working with the group, helping teachers see the need for possible change in beliefs and so on, it's a long journey. And we like Kahner's term of the grown zone, that anytime that you're working with teachers with any group, you're going to go through a grown zone where people are learning to deal with the fact that they don't see things the same way, and helping coaches understand that. I don't think we give enough preparation training, you called it, in our pre-service kinds of programs to helping people understand how to work as a team, either as a leader or as a member of that team.
It's a big part of thinking and working like a facilitator, right? How do you
Right.
help a group kind of, feel safe enough, to trust one another, to enter into that grown zone and then come out the other side better for it, right? As opposed to just kind of, surfacing the ways in which we diverge and then leaving everyone hanging. That's working like a facilitator.
Yeah. So I would love to kind of, as my final question, I would love to hear, what are some concrete ways that coaches can impact the culture, the system? What are things they can do, they can take away from this episode and at least start to implement as soon as possible? Maybe tomorrow, maybe not.
I guess I can give one or two and then I'll hand it to Rita. I mean, I think thinking like a change agent really requires partnering closely with the school principal, right?
Right.
And making sure that there is a tight alignment between the curriculum, the mission and vision of the school, and then the advice that both coaches and principals are giving as they are traveling around the school and working with teachers and classrooms. If those two actors in the school are giving wildly divergent kind of messages and advice, that is ultimately going to make for a conflict within the school and the system. So that's kind of one way in which we talk a lot in the book about all the different strategies and habits that coaches can adopt to partner closely with their principal.
I would certainly support that. And that's one of the, I think, factors that when we've done research, coaches will say, we can't be successful unless we have a good relationship with the principal and the principal understands our role. So I think that's really key. I would just add to that. I think the way that we help to build that kind of understanding of culture and building teamwork is to develop the kinds of relationships with teachers that help build capacity. Seeing where you can involve teachers in the role of coaching, in the role of being leaders with others, actually developing the sense of trust. I think, Becca, you used the term a low risk environment, creating a low risk environment where the coach isn't, quote, the expert, but using her or his expertise to develop skills in others. So it takes good listening. It
Yes.
takes, I see where that person can really be helpful in this team. Let's pull that person in. And
Mhm.
again, that's that facilitator role, that's that change agent role. And so those are, I guess I can call them soft characteristics in the
Mm.
sense that, but you're so observant, you're able to see what people can bring to the table.
Mhm. I love that you highlighted listening. I think my personal opinion is that listening is the most important skill of a coach, and questioning is a close second.
Yes.
And I love that I love that you highlighted that. I think I want to, speaking to mindsets of folks listening, one thing I just want to name that is an underlying mindset of everything we're talking about is that it is possible for a coach to intentionally strengthen a relationship with a principal. Sometimes in schools, coaches feel powerless. Like, well, if my principal doesn't want a relationship with me or is going to do XYZ or be this way, then I can't do anything about it. And and it's not actually true. That is not true. And I
It's
actively coach coaches to I lead up. I call it leading up, right? And you can be proactive and develop skills and strategies to develop that relationship.
it you're so right. It's something we talk about across our books that, we call it coaching up. A same
Yeah,
kind of
sure.
idea, same kind of idea. And you know, sometimes it's little things. As Rita said, it's not easy. It's not something that's going to happen overnight, but little things like always showing up when you're meeting with the principal with a small agenda to say,
Mm,
here are the things that we should talk about every time we connect, right? Making sure that you are spending that time really wisely, making sure you're on the principal's calendar regularly, making sure you're sharing your calendar with the principal so they're aware of kind of how you're operating, who you're meeting with, how you're spending your time. All those little things do add up to a strong relationship between coach and principal.
yeah. And I think my human-centered approach to coaching, something I also like to teach people is learning the communication style of the leader. If the
Sure.
coach is doing this with the leader and not connecting, the coach is saying X, the principal saying Y. It doesn't even seem like they're in the same conversation half the time. Something I teach them to do is understand their style of communication, because we have little mirror neurons in our brains, the same things that cause us to yawn when someone else yawns. And when someone is mirroring our communication style, anyways, research shows like our neurology, I don't know what it is, but our brain waves start to mirror each other, which is mind blowing. Anyway, it's a whole nother episode, but and when that happens, synergy happens.
It takes a lot of, as you said before, it takes a lot of listening and I think a
Yeah.
lot of observing as the coach. And
Yeah.
and I think you're right. I mean, if you have a principal who wants to communicate over email, okay, jump on that. Or if your
Yes.
best bet is, okay, great, Monday morning for a few minutes, we're just going to touch base for 5 minutes face to face. Great. Knowing what your principal's patterns of communication are is
Mm,
critical.
yeah. For sure. Okay. I hate to do this. We have to wrap up. There's so many more things I want to talk to you about, but I want to encourage everyone here to purchase your second edition. Tell us the full title of the book.
It's cultivating coaching mindsets, an action
Mhm.
guide for instructional leaders. And it really is about coaching across all grade levels and across all content areas.
Perfect. Okay, I love that. And when does it get released?
I think it's slated for release in December or January from Guilford Press. Right in time for the holidays,
Mhm.
24, 25.
I love it. So I'll put links in the show notes in terms like leading people to at least be able to look at that second edition and all of that. So thank you so much for both of you being here. I really appreciate it. Is there anything, just one last thing you'd love to leave our coaches and leaders with?
I would. I think it's one of the most exciting positions in the field of education. I think if you have the opportunity to coach, that you have the opportunity to make great changes for students. And so it's a terrific position because there's something different every day.
I
Couldn't have
love
said
it.
it better.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Becca, thank you.
Thanks, Becca. Have a great day.
You too.